Let's see what this beast can do.
What in the world is that? She wasn't invited.
Is that her car?
That's a Lamborghini. She wasn't invited.
Is that her car?
That's a Lamborghini. I now pronounce you.
Hello, son.
I wasn't invited to my son's wedding, but the pastor stopped the ceremony when he saw me step out of a Lamborghini. The engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was silent. I sat in that car, black Lamborghini Urus, tinted windows, parked right outside a church that belonged to me. I looked at my reflection in the visor mirror, my daughter Alani sitting right beside me, squeezing my hand. She looked at me and said, "Mama, you ready?" I took one breath, just one, and I said, "Baby, I've been ready." I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not bitter. I was for a long time, but today I walked into my healing wearing heels and carrying receipts, and every single person inside that church was about to find out who I really was. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Storytime with Precious. I need you to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notification bell, because the stories I bring you, you won't find them anywhere else. Like this video, drop your country and the time you're watching in the comments before we continue, because this one is going to make you feel things you weren't prepared for today. All right, my name is Samaya Reed. I was born the oldest of 5 siblings in West Philadelphia. Row house on a narrow street, narrow hallway, narrow everything. But my mother, she had a wide, wide heart. She worked double shifts at the hospital as a nursing aide. She smelled like hand sanitizer and cocoa butter. And she sang when she cooked. Not because life was easy, but because she refused to let it break her. My father worked construction until his knees gave out. Then he drove a bus. Then he did whatever needed doing. They weren't rich, but they were present. They were consistent, and they loved us loud. I was 19 when they passed. Car accident on the expressway, coming home from my youngest sister Naomi's college orientation. They never made it back. I got the call at 11:47 at night. I remember the exact time because I had just checked my phone wondering why they were late. I dropped the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not yet, because in my mind, one thought took over everything else. My siblings. Who was going to take care of my siblings? Naomi was 18, Ayana was 20, my brother Zaylin was 22, my brother Jabari was 24, and me, 19 years old, the oldest girl, and suddenly the one everybody looked to. Now here's the thing about me. I had always been sharp, not just book smart, street smart, business-minded. Even as a teenager, I was the one selling snacks out of my locker, running little side businesses, always thinking about how to make something from nothing. My mother used to call me her little CEO. She wasn't wrong. I had saved up $3,000 by the time I was 19, from odd jobs, from selling things, from watching every dollar. After my parents passed, I used most of that to cover the funeral. And then I sat at the kitchen table one night, alone after everyone had gone to bed, and I looked at the bills. Rent, utilities, food. 5 people, 1 table, no parents. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to collapse. I was going to build. I got 2 jobs, then 3. I took every class I could afford: business, finance, real estate. I studied at night after everyone else was asleep. I read every book I could get my hands on, and slowly, something started to move. By the time I was 24, I had bought my first property, a small commercial unit in West Philly, rented it out, reinvested, bought another one. By 27, I had a small real estate portfolio and a property management company that was growing faster than I had imagined. I put all 5 of my siblings through college. Yes, I paid every tuition, bought Ayana her first car, helped Zaylin start his first business, paid for Jabari's certification program, sent Naomi abroad for her master's degree. Everything. I did everything. Not because I had to, because they were mine. And I made a promise standing over my parents' graves that I would not let them fall. The neighborhood knew me. My name carried weight on those streets. That's Samaya Reed. She built this block. I didn't do it for the credit. I did it because it was right. But you know what's funny about doing things for people? Sometimes they forget. Sometimes they take it as their right by becoming entitled. And sometimes the same people you carried are the first ones to let you drown. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before all of that, there was Nasir. Nasir Blake. Tall man, dark skin, full beard, the kind of man who walked into a room and the air just shifted. I met him at a business conference in downtown Philadelphia. I was 31. He was 35. He came up to me after a panel I had spoken on about real estate investment in underserved communities. He said, "You didn't just speak well, you spoke truth." I looked at him, and something in me said, "Be careful with this one." I should have listened. But he was persistent. Not in an aggressive way, in a patient way. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. He was attentive in a way that felt rare. He asked about my siblings. He remembered their names. He sat at my kitchen table and ate whatever I cooked and never once complained. He made me laugh, real laughter, the kind that comes from your belly and catches you off guard. And after 2 years of dating, he proposed.
Samaya, I don't want to do any of this without you. Will you marry me?
Yes.
Simple ring, rooftop dinner, Philadelphia skyline behind us. I said yes. We got married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by people who loved us. My siblings were all there, dancing, glowing, happy. And I thought to myself that night, this is it. This is what you build toward. We had 3 children. My daughter Alani came first, then my sons, Carter and Mikhail. 3 babies, 3 heartbeats, my whole world wrapped up in 3 people. And for years, life was good, real good. Nasir and I ran a business together alongside my properties. He had a logistics company. We complemented each other. Or so I thought. The first crack happened quietly, like they always do. I noticed it one morning when I was going over the books. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Withdrawals I didn't authorize. Small ones at first. $50 here, $100 there. I asked Nasir about it. He brushed it off, said it was miscategorized expenses. I let it go. I shouldn't have. The second crack was louder. His business started struggling. Contracts fell through. He lost 2 major clients in a month. The tension in the house started building. He stopped coming to bed at a normal hour. He started staying out late.
Don't question me, Samaya!
Not just late. Some nights he didn't come home at all. And when I asked him where he'd been, his eyes went cold. Not angry cold, dismissive cold. Like I was an inconvenience. Like I was someone who had no right to ask. He said, "Don't question me, Samaya. Just like that. Flat. Final, like a door slamming in my face. I want you to understand something. I had never been the type of woman who needed someone to tell her her worth. I knew who I was. So when a man starts making you feel small, you notice it. You just sometimes hope you're wrong. I wasn't wrong. My business had taken a hit too during that period. Market shifts, a few bad investments. It happens in business. You regroup, you recover. But for the first time in a long time, I was stretched thin. And for the first time in my adult life, I reached out to my siblings. I had never asked them for anything, not once. I had given and given and given without keeping score. But now I was struggling, and I called them, one by one. Ayana was the first. I explained the situation calmly, told her I just needed some bridging capital, temporary. I would pay it back with interest. She said, "Samaya, things are tight right now. I don't know." Tight? The woman I put through a 4-year university? The woman whose car note I paid for 18 months? Tight? Zaylin was next. He let the phone ring 4 times before picking up. When I explained what I needed, he cleared his throat and said, "My wife and I have been talking about some renovations." Renovations? I sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "Okay, Zaylin." And I hung up. Jabari didn't answer at all the first 2 times I called. The 3rd time, he picked up and said he was in a meeting and would call back. He never called back. Naomi, my baby sister, the one I had sent abroad, the one who had cried in my arms after our parents died and promised me she would always have my back. Naomi said, "I'm really sorry, Samaya. I just can't right now." I put the phone down and I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had stayed up many nights studying so they could all sleep peacefully, the same kitchen where I had made decisions so they wouldn't have to carry the weight. And I felt something I had never let myself feel before. Used. Not abandoned. Used. But I swallowed it because I am Samaya Reed, and I had rebuilt before, and I would rebuild again. What I didn't know at the time was that while I was trying to rebuild my business, my sister, Naomi, was spending time with my husband. I found out the way you find out things you were never supposed to know. A receipt dropped in the pocket of a jacket I was sending to the dry cleaner. Dinner for 2. A restaurant I had never been to with him. The date was a Tuesday night, the same Tuesday he had told me he had a late meeting. I didn't confront him right away. I started paying attention, watching, the way you watch something when you're hoping you're misreading it. But there are only so many coincidences before they become a pattern. 3 weeks later, I drove past the restaurant, and I saw his car. I parked. I sat there. I told myself, "Don't go in," but my feet didn't listen to my head. I walked in. Corner booth. Candlelight. And there he was, Nasir, my husband, sitting across from my sister Naomi, laughing, leaning in.
I love you so much.
I love you too.
Like 2 people who had built a whole private world. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds, long enough for both of them to look up, long enough to see the guilt flash across both their faces. And then I turned around and walked out. That night, I called Naomi. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I saw you tonight." Silence. Then she said, "Samaya, I was going to tell you." I said,
Tell me what, Naomi? Another silence. And then she said something I will never forget for as long as I live. She said, "You're not enough for him anymore. You're not the woman he married. You've lost your money. Your business is struggling. And I'm in a better position to give him what he needs." I heard every word, every single word. And then she said, "You've always been bad luck, Samaya. Everything around you falls apart eventually." Bad luck. The woman I raised, the woman I carried, the woman who cried at my parents' grave and held my hand, called me bad luck. I ended the call. I didn't cry that night. I went to my closet, pulled out a notepad, and I started writing. Because in moments of great pain, you have two choices. You can dissolve or you can decide. I had always been the kind of woman who decides. 2 months later, Nasir came home one evening. He sat down at the dining room table. He placed an envelope in front of me. No preamble, no emotion, just the envelope. I looked at it. I already knew what it was. I opened it anyway. Divorce papers. I read every page slowly, and when I was done, I folded them carefully, placed them back on the table, and said, "Okay." He looked almost disappointed, like he wanted a reaction, like he needed me to beg. I gave him nothing. He cleared his throat and said he would leave the house to me, but he wanted to split the children's custody. I stood up from that table and said no. Just no, nothing else. But the courts, the lawyers, the whole process, it dragged, and in the end, he took the boys. Carter and Mackay, my sons, my 2 boys who used to run to me when they had bad dreams. He took them, and I was left with my daughter, Alani. I had one condition I fought for, one, that I could see my sons at least once a month. He agreed on paper, but agreements on paper only work when people have honor, and Nasir had none. The visits became irregular, then sparse. Then one day they stopped altogether, and when I called to ask why, I was told the boys were busy, the boys were adjusting, the boys didn't want to come. My sons who didn't want to come. I need you to understand what it feels like to lose your children to someone else's story. They were growing up in that house with their father, with Naomi, being fed a version of their mother that was shaped by bitterness and shame, being told she failed, being told she wasn't enough, growing up without my voice in their ears, without my cooking on their plates, without my arms on the hard days. That is a grief that has no bottom. But I kept moving because Alani needed me to, and because somewhere deep inside me something had shifted, not broken, shifted. I went back to work, not the way I had worked before, different, sharper, more focused. I took what was left of my real estate portfolio and I got quiet. I stopped talking about what I was building. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped being visible. And I worked. Alani grew into a remarkable young woman. She had my eyes, my stubbornness, her father's height, but she chose me. Every single day she chose me. She would sit at the kitchen table while I went over documents, and she would say, "Mama, you're the most hard-working person I know." And I would look at her and think, as long as you turn out okay, nothing else matters. Years passed. The company I had quietly been rebuilding grew beyond what I had imagined. Real estate, property development, commercial holdings across Philadelphia. I had always been good at this, but now I was exceptional because now I had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Not to them, to myself. I heard through people that my siblings were doing well, running companies, living well, comfortable lives. What they didn't know was that many of the foundational things that had made their success possible traced back to me. Investments I had made in their names years ago. Properties I had placed under structures they didn't fully understand. Quiet arrangements I had made for them before everything fell apart. I had always been the architect. They had just never paid attention to the blueprints. And I heard about Carter, my firstborn son. That he was doing well, that he was handsome, that he had his father's build, and I hoped something of mine underneath it, that he was getting married. I can't explain to you what that felt like. My son getting married, and I wasn't told. Not by him, not by his father, not by anyone who was supposed to love me. I found out through someone who had gotten an invitation. I sat in my home office that evening, my building, my office, my chair, and I held the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I called the church. I asked for the pastor, Pastor Kylan Hayes. He had been the pastor of that church for over 15 years. I had met him before, briefly. He knew of me. I explained who I was. I told him I was Carter's mother. I told him I had not been invited to my own wedding day, and I was asking, humbly, if he could speak to Carter on my behalf. Not to cause trouble, just to let me in, just to let me be there. He paused for a long moment, and then he said, "Sister Samaya, I understand your pain, but the family has made a specific request. They don't want any disruptions on this day." Disruptions? I was the disruption, the mother. I said, "Pastor, that is my son." He said, "I know, but my hands are tied." His hands are tied. What he didn't say out loud, but what I understood clearly, was that those hands had been tied with money. Because that's how some people operate. You can buy almost anything from almost anyone if you offer the right amount. I ended the call, and I looked out my office window at the Philadelphia skyline, the city I had built something in, the city that had watched me struggle and survive, and I said out loud to no one but myself, "Okay." That word again, but this time it meant something different. This time it meant, watch what I do next. The wedding day came, a Saturday in October. Philadelphia in the fall is something else. The leaves turn gold and rust and deep red. The air is crisp. The light hits different. I woke up early that morning, earlier than usual. I sat at my vanity and looked at myself. Silver micro-twists hanging all the way to my waist, the salt and pepper blend catching the early morning light. I took my time. I parted my twists slightly off-center, pulled the front sections gently back from my face. I put on my earrings, the ones that catch every eye in every room. I chose a deep wine-colored dress, fitted, dignified. I looked at myself for a long moment, and then I smiled. Not a performance smile, a real one, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Alani knocked on my door. She stepped in wearing a tailored deep burgundy suit. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "Mama, you look like somebody's consequences." I laughed. out loud, for real. She has always been my hype woman. We walked downstairs together, and parked in my private garage was the black Lamborghini Urus. Black on black, custom interior. My name didn't need to be on the door. The car said enough. We drove through Philadelphia. The city moved around us. I watched the streets go by. Streets I had walked broke. Streets I had worked on before anyone believed in me. Streets that now, in one way or another, had my fingerprints on them. We pulled up to the church, Bethel Community Church. A beautiful building, white stone, arched windows, manicured garden out front. Guests in their finest standing around outside taking photos before heading in. I cut the engine and I sat there. For a moment, just one moment. Alani said, "Mama, you ready?" I said, "Baby, I've been ready." I stepped out of that car. One heel, then the other. I stood up straight. Every single thing about me was composed, intentional, whole. And the noise outside that church stopped. Not completely, but enough. Enough for heads to turn, enough for mouths to open, enough for the conversation near the entrance to dissolve into confused whispers. Who is that? Is that Samaya Reed? Wait, isn't that Carter's mother? She wasn't invited. Is that her car? That's a Lamborghini. I didn't look left or right. I walked forward, Alani right beside me. But here's what made it cinematic. See, the ceremony had already started. They had started early, or I had arrived just at the right time, depending on how you look at it. Inside that church, people were seated. The bridesmaids had walked, the groomsmen were in position, the bride was at the front. My son, my Carter, was standing at that altar in a suit that told me his father's money had done something right, at least in terms of his wardrobe. And Pastor Kylan Hayes was 2 sentences away from pronouncing them husband and wife.
I now pronounce you
2 sentences. When the sound of that Lamborghini engine reached the church, it cut through the organ music. It cut through the vows. It cut through everything. Someone near the back doors opened them, probably out of curiosity, and the October light came flooding in, and with it, the sight of a black Lamborghini and a woman stepping out of it like she had been announced. The whispers started at the back of the church and moved forward like a wave. Pastor Kylan Hayes stopped mid-sentence. I watched him from outside as Alani and I approached the entrance. He looked out. He saw me, and something crossed his face. Not guilt, not exactly, but something close to it. Something that looked like a man who suddenly understood that the bill had come due.
I now pronounce you.
He raised his hand, and he stopped the ceremony. The bride looked confused. The groom, my son Carter, turned, and he saw me. I want to describe that moment carefully, because it was not triumphant, not immediately. It was human, raw. It was a son seeing his mother for the first time in years. And no matter what he had been told about me, no matter what version of me had been constructed in his absence, something in his face shifted. The muscle memory of love is a powerful thing. You can build walls around it. You can bury it under years of silence and other people's stories. But when the person who first held you walks into a room, the body remembers. I walked in, the whole church watching, every seat full, every head turned. My sister Naomi was seated in the front row in a dress that told me she had dressed like the mother of the groom. She saw me. Her face went still. Nasir was beside her, his jaw tightened. My other siblings were scattered in the pews. Anaya, Zaylin, Jabari, all of them seeing me, all of them looking at me in that dress, those earrings, that presents, and doing the math they hadn't expected to have to do. I walked straight down the aisle, not rushing, not performing, just walking, the way a woman walks when she owns every step. I stopped in front of my son, Carter. My firstborn, tall like his father, strong like me. He was staring at me, not with anger, not anymore, with something more complicated, confusion, and underneath it, something that looked a lot like longing. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I reached out my hand and I placed it on his face, the way I used to when he was small and had a fever and I would sit up with him through the night. I said, "My son." Just that, 2 words. His eyes filled. He didn't speak. I reached into the bag Alani was holding and I pulled out a gift, a box, wrapped simply. Inside was a deed, a property, in his name, in his bride's name, a wedding gift. I handed it to him. I said, "I may not have been invited, but I am still your mother, and a mother does not stop giving just because she is not welcomed." The silence in that church was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I turned and I walked to Pastor Kylan Hayes. He was standing at the front, hands clasped, looking like a man who had made a wrong turn and only just noticed. I stopped in front of him. I said, and I kept my voice low, calm, conversational, "Pastor Hayes, you know this building?" He blinked. He said, Yes." I said, "I own it." The silence that followed was different, sharper. I said, "You have 2 days to make arrangements." He opened his mouth, closed it. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and I walked back down that aisle, past every face, past Naomi, past Nasir, past every sibling who had told me they had nothing when they had everything. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Alani fell into step beside me, and when we stepped back out into that October afternoon, the city wrapped around us like it always had, like it recognized us, like it had been waiting. We got in the car. I put on my seatbelt. Alani looked at me. She said, "Mama, that was—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I just smiled, and I drove. The wedding news spread through our community fast. Philadelphia is a big city, but certain circles are small. By that evening, the story had moved from guest to guest to neighbor. By the next morning, it was everywhere in the community. Samaya Reed had shown up to her son's wedding uninvited in a Lamborghini and stopped the ceremony and told the pastor he had 2 days to vacate her building. People had questions, big ones. How? When? How had she become this? Where had the Samaya who was struggling gone? The answer was simple. She hadn't gone anywhere. She had gone quiet, and quiet is not the same as gone. 2 days after the wedding, Pastor Kylan Hayes called my office. He was not calling about the building. Well, he was, but he was also calling because his conscience had arrived a little late and was now knocking loudly. He said, "Sister Samaya, I owe you an apology." I said, "You do?" He said, "They paid me, not a large amount, but enough that I convinced myself I was protecting the peace of a wedding day." I said, "Pastor, what you protected was your pocket, and you know the difference." He was quiet. I said, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't rewrite what you did. I need you to honor what I said." He did. Within the month, I had other tenants interested in the building, good tenants paying market rate. Life moves forward. My siblings came to me 3 weeks after the wedding, all 4 of them, Ayana, Zaylin, Jabari, and Naomi. They came together like a committee of guilt. They arrived at my home wearing the weight of what they had discovered, that the company Zaylin had been running for the past few years, the investment fund that had seeded Jabari's certification business into something much bigger, the real estate holdings that Ayana had leveraged to build her lifestyle, the connections that had helped Naomi build her consulting firm. All of it traced back to original investments I had made in their names years before everything fell apart. Quiet arrangements, structures they hadn't paid attention to because they had assumed I would always be there handling things, because they had taken me for granted so long they had forgotten I had built the foundation they were all standing on. When I tell you they came with their heads low, I mean heads low. Ayana was crying before she even sat down. Zaylin couldn't make eye contact. Jabari kept clearing his throat. And Naomi, my baby sister, the one who had called me bad luck, the one who had taken my husband, she stood in my living room and she said, "Samaya, I am so sorry. I don't have words for what I did. I don't have a reason that would be good enough. She stopped. She said, "I was selfish, I was wrong, and I've carried it." I looked at all of them, these faces that I had poured my life into, these faces that knew every version of me, who had watched me build and watched me fall and had done nothing to catch me. I said, "Sit down." They sat. I walked to the window, looked out at Philadelphia, my city. I said, "I have already begun the process of restructuring."
What does that mean? I said, "It means I've removed your names from the structures. I've reclaimed what was mine. The investments you built on no longer have your names attached to them. You will need to rebuild from your own foundations." The room went quiet in a particular way. The way rooms go quiet when people are absorbing loss. Zaylin said, "Samaya, we have families. We have people depending on us." I said, "I know." Then he said, "You can't just—" I said, "Zaylin, I carried you. I carried all of you for years, without asking, without resentment. And when I needed you, you turned away. Every single one of you looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the effort." No one argued. No one had a counter. I said, "I'm not doing this out of spite. I am not vindictive. I'm doing this because allowing you to continue benefiting from my work while pretending I don't exist is something I can no longer support. There is a lesson here. It's not mine to deliver. You'll find it." I did not raise my voice, not once. I didn't need to. They left. And I stood in my living room, and I let myself feel all of it, the grief, the relief, the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had stopped shrinking. Now, Nasir, he came last, about 2 weeks after my siblings. He showed up at my door in a way that told me things had shifted in his world. He was still tall and strong-looking, but something in his posture had changed. He had the look of a man who had made calculations that had come out wrong. He said, "Samaya, can we talk?" I stepped aside, let him in. He sat down. He talked about the boys, about how he realized he needed me. He talked about his regret. He talked about how things with Naomi had changed. He didn't say how. He didn't need to. Leopards and spots. Then he said, "I want to come back." I looked at him, at this man who had discarded me when the math changed, who had taken my sons, who had let my sister call me bad luck in my own story.
I reached into the drawer of my side table. I pulled out a document. It was the divorce papers, the ones from years ago. I had kept them, not because I was bitter, but because they told a truth. I placed them in his hands, and I said, "Nasir, you made your choice, and I made mine, and mine led here. Yours led here, too. Money is not everything. You taught me that without meaning to, because when I had it, you wanted me. When I didn't, you left. And when I rebuilt it, you came back. That's not love. That's a business arrangement. And I don't need a business partner in my love life." He looked at the papers. He looked at me. He said, "I made mistakes." I said, "You did." He said, "Can't people change?" I said, "Maybe they can, but changed people don't get automatic access to the lives they left behind. They start over, somewhere else." He left, and that was that. But my sons, my boys, that was a different conversation, and a harder one. Carter came to see me 3 days after the wedding, without his father telling him to, without anyone pushing him. He came on his own. He knocked on my door. I opened it, and this tall, strong young man who had his father's build and his mother's eyes stood on my doorstep and said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I opened the door wider. I said, "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had sat at all those years ago going over bills, the same table where I had made decisions, and he talked. He told me what growing up in that house had been like, what they had said about me, how he had been told I had abandoned them, that I hadn't fought for them, that I hadn't tried. He had believed it for years. Because when you're young and someone you trust tells you a story, you build your world on it. But he said something had always nagged at him, a feeling he couldn't name, a gap in the story that nothing ever filled. And when he stood at that altar and turned and saw me walking down that aisle in that church that turned out to be mine, something cracked open. He said, "I looked at you and I knew. I knew none of what they told me was the whole truth." I reached across that table and I held his hand, my son's hand, grown now, strong like mine. I said, "You have never not been my son, not one day, not when I couldn't reach you, not when the calls stopped, not when the visits ended. You have always been mine." He put his head down on the table like he was 5 years old again, and he cried, and I let him. Mikhail took a little longer. He was always the more guarded one, but a month later he came too, and we started the slow work of rebuilding. Not fast, not perfect, but real, honest, built on truth instead of someone else's version of it. There are people in your life right now who are underestimating you. Maybe they've told you you're not enough. Maybe they left when things got hard. Maybe they took what you built and forgot to say thank you. Maybe they made you feel like your struggle was your fault. I need you to hear me. Your struggle is not your story's ending. It is the middle. And the middle is where the transformation happens. I was broke. I was abandoned. I was replaced. I was uninvited to my own son's wedding, and I sat in a parking lot outside a church that belonged to me. And I had a choice. I chose to show up, not to prove something to them, to prove something to myself. To my daughter watching from the passenger seat, to my sons who had been told a lie about who their mother was, To every woman who has ever been told she was too much or not enough at the same time. The car was just a car. The building was just a building. What mattered was that I had never stopped building, even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. And that is the lesson. Not the revenge, not the reclaiming. The lesson is this. Do not stop building in your quiet seasons. Do not let anyone else's assessment of your worth determine the effort you put into your life. The people who leave when things get hard are not your loss. They are your clarity. They show you who was there for the season and who was there for the harvest. And family, true family, is not always blood. Sometimes blood is just people who share your history but not your values. Choose your inner circle carefully. Give generously, but know your worth. And when the moment comes for the truth to speak, let it speak quietly, because quiet confidence is louder than any noise. I am Samaya Raid. I was uninvited to my son's wedding, and the pastor stopped the ceremony when he saw me step out of my Lamborghini, not because of the car, because of what the car represented. A woman who was told she was finished and refused to be. I got married again to a different man who lost his wife several years ago to cancer. My marriage is private and I enjoy it that way. I enjoy having my kids around, my grandchildren around, including my stepsons and stepdaughters. And that is my story. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have shown up to that wedding? Would you have confronted your sister? Would you have signed those divorce papers without making noise? Or wait a minute, I just thought of this question too. Would you have stayed in that marriage and begged your husband not to divorce you after he gave you those papers, despite cheating on you with your sisters? I want to know, because these conversations matter. Every comment, every perspective, every one of you watching from wherever you are in the world right now. If you're new here, welcome home. This is Storytime with Precious, and we do not do shallow stories here. We do real. We do emotional. We do the kind of storytelling that makes you look at your own life a little differently when it's over. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Turn on your notification bell because we upload new stories regularly, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. Like this video if Samaya's story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is in their quiet season right now. Someone who is rebuilding and wondering if it's worth it. Tell them, it is worth it. And I'll see you in the next story. When you stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for your size, that's when you finally take up the room you were always meant to fill. Samaya is saying bye.